Hey guys, have you ever wondered what's the difference between raw photography and compressed raw photography? Well, today I'm going to test this out. I'm going to shoot photographs in raw and then shoot the same photographs in compressed raw, because compressed raw takes up a lot less space and it's faster to work with on our computer, and it's just an easier workflow. So that's what I'll be testing today, and hopefully we will get some conclusive answers. Let's go. Now for this test I have chosen a sunset scene, which you can see right here behind you, and I think this is going to serve as a nice contrasty frame where I can on one hand shoot with the correct exposure and on the other hand underexposed by one stop, and actually see what the difference is in terms of the shadows and the highlights. Now in terms of camera settings, I will be shooting with f/16 to get that starburst, ISO 100 for all of the photographs because, well, I want to preserve as much detail as I can. And for other photographs, I'll be shooting with f/5.6 to get a more in focus and a more sharp image. And for the second shot, I'll be photographing our lovely town of Kamnik. And this is going to be an example of a more balanced photograph. Now what I'm mostly interested in is to see how much detail is preserved in the shadows and the highlights at the same time. I'm curious to see if there's any change into the dynamic range, into the colors, because I know that both compressed and uncompressed raw files on the Sony A7iii are 14 bits, so 14 bits of colors. So I'm not losing anything in terms of colors, but where is that loss of half of the size of the file that I get out of this camera? Now with me as always is Alex. Hey Alex!
Hey Dad!
What are you doing? Smashing the rocks. That's nice. So I brought all of the photographs into Lightroom. I've separated them into two folders. One is the compressed raw folder. I have 21 photographs, and in the true raw photo, so uncompressed, also 21 equivalent photographs. Now I'm going to push these photographs into the extreme in terms of editing and see if anything is different between the raw file and the half-size compressed raw. I do have to mention that the full raw file on the Sony A7iii is around 50 megabytes and the compressed raw is about half that, so 25 megabytes, which is quite a big difference in terms of camera performance, computer performance, and just the whole saving of the disk space in both of these devices. Now first I need to visually separate all of these photographs so that I know which ones are raw and which ones are compressed raw when I'm comparing them side by side. So I'm going to go into the compressed raw folder, select everything, and then just add a color label yellow. And for the full raw, I'm going to select everything and select the color label red. This way I can easily distinguish between the photographs. Now let's start off with the first comparison, which is this one-stop underexposed shot. I'm going to select both of these, go to the Develops tab, click the Auto button over here. This way Lightroom will auto adjust the exposure, and that's what I typically do as a first step when I'm starting to edit photographs. And if I compare the two photographs side by side, so the raw file and the compressed raw file, I can honestly not see any major difference. Even if I go here into the highlights and the branches, they look kind of similar. So I'm going to have to push the edit into extreme in order to actually see if there is any difference. So I have both of these files still selected, and I'm just going to go crazy with the edit. So I'm going to bump up the saturation, bump up the vibrance, and I'll really try to make a very, very contrasty looking photograph. Okay, I think this does it. I would never edit photographs like this, but this is definitely pushing all the photo data to the extreme. So now let's see if there's any difference between these two photographs. And still, here is the raw file, and on the right side is the compressed raw. And honestly, if I zoom in, I'm not seeing any major difference. Actually, I'm not even seeing a difference. The gradient from the yellow to the blue seems very similar. I don't see any banding, and this just shows that both the compressed raw and the full raw both have 14 bits of color information. Now seriously, by looking at this, I can't really tell that there's any major difference where I would say, oh yeah, this is where the raw file is much better than the compressed raw. Let's see some of the other examples. Now the second pair are both taken with the correct exposure, so exposure value of 0. And here again, I'm going to click the auto and just see if there's any real comparison between these two photographs. Here on the left side you have the full raw, and on the right side you have the compressed raw. Again, in terms of sharpness, in terms of colors and detail, the highlight preservation, I can't really see any difference. Even the noise level looks pretty much the same. So let's push this into the extreme. Now if I'm zoomed in at 300%, honestly, I can't really say that there's any difference. Let's look at another pair. Let's check these two. See if there's any difference between these two. Again, on the left side, the full RAW, and on the right side, the compressed RAW. The framings are not exactly the same because I was hand holding as I was photographing, but you can see that the settings are pretty much the same. Yeah, I don't really see any difference. Let's push it into the extreme. So I really want to see the colors start to fall apart, and it's really hard to make colors fall apart if there's 14 bits of color depth information. So if I go to this church thing over here, I mean, I don't know. Honestly, I can't decide which one would be which. I mean, if I didn't know that the one on the left is the full RAW and the one on the right is the compressed RAW, yeah, it's really hard to tell, even the dark areas. If I just lift everything, see how the dark areas look. 300%, framing not exactly the same. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't know. Definitely looks the same, so there you have it. I mean, there is pretty much no visual difference between a RAW and a compressed RAW file, except for that half of the size of the files and, well, half of the storage saved, and the processing power is faster with smaller files. And honestly, I think I might be switching to compressed RAW for a little while and get some experience with that and maybe do a follow-up video. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you've learned something new. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Hit the like button for the algorithm and let me know what you think down in the comments. If you're new, consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys and girls in the next video. Bye bye.